Agents podcast.
Okay, Lab Coat Agents, we are back for another episode of the Lab Coat Agents podcast. And I'm excited today to speak to our guest who I met about 2 minutes ago. And but I'm excited because of his resume. And we're going to be talking to Hans Struzyna. That's a tongue twister right then and of itself. He lives in the Bay Area, works in the Bay Area, is a successful realtor, podcaster, and Olympian, folks. That's really what grabbed my attention. For those of you who know me, you know I'm a sports guy. So anytime I get to talk to an ex-athlete or maybe current athlete, I usually get a little excited about that. And although he's had a ton of success in real estate, and we're going to talk about things like mindset and personal branding and goal setting and being coachable and those kind of things. You know, Hans, I have 2 questions for you out of the gate. First of all, I just need to hear about this 2016 U.S. Olympic rowing team because that just is really, really cool. But before I do that, because your name is Hans and I'm just corny and stupid, frankly, I have to know, do you have a sibling named Franz? I mean, do you?
No, but I can point to the beach pretty good.
So you knew exactly where I was going with that.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So half the audience right now is shaking their head and saying, Jeff, you're an idiot. Half the audience is laughing and saying that was good. Well, maybe less than that, actually. But I'm glad you went along with it. Thank you.
I love a good corny joke, man. It's all good.
Hans and Franz.
Good Hans and Franz. You got it.
I'm sure you haven't heard that your entire life. And you're like, yeah, another stupid joke. So Hans, welcome to the show. So again, from the Bay Area, obviously I'm going to assume I don't know you. So I imagine a lot of our audience doesn't know who you are. So tell us who you are. Tell us how you kind of came up in business and how you got to where you are today.
Jeff, thanks for having me on, man. It's an honor to be here. Fan of the show. So it's really cool to be on it finally. So originally I'm not from the Bay Area. I'm from Seattle, Washington area. And if anyone has ever visited the Pacific Northwest, you know, it rains a lot, you know, there's a lot of water around. Rowing is actually a pretty big sport up there. Hence, just my involvement in it. It was visible because there's a lot of lakes around. And so it was one of those fringe sports that wasn't so fringe in Seattle. And basically I was the kid who was trying every single sport I could possibly try. I grew late. And someone basically said, hey, have your family go do some rowing lessons together. It's fun. Kept going, made the varsity team, you know, made a college team, kept going, went to the Olympics, and sort of a 12-year, that's 4 sentences to encapsulate 12 years of rowing.
How old were you when you started doing it? So how old were you when you went to go to get those lessons?
14.
Wow.
I think it was, 14.
I mean, think about that. I mean, you know, becoming an Olympic athlete is like making the big leagues, right? I mean, it's the top of the level. And how many, you know, NBA players or Major League Baseball players or NHL or NFL can say, yeah, I started when I was 14. Probably no one. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It was just, I mean, everyone's like, first question, how do you get into that sport? And like I said, where I grew up influenced a lot. Not just the sport, but a lot in my life. And so I just got into it and found I had a talent for it. I was tall. I had long legs, long arms. I did grow late, but I had a good work ethic, and that with some other things really kind of propelled me through the sport of rowing, and just kept focusing on that next thing in front of me. I never thought I was going to the Olympics, always kind of wanted to row in college for the University of Washington, because that was those were the guys out on the lake that you saw and you're like, ooh, that's the team to be on. That's cool. And very, 100+ year history for that rowing program. So there's a lot of tradition there that was fun to be part of too. So
awesome. So one more question on this and then I'll let it go. Team rowing or individual?
Team. So rowing is almost exclusively a team sport, even with the sole exception of rowing a single, which is great for training, but you have to have a couple screws loose to actually race that thing, because it's a lot. We could go down a rabbit hole on the psychology of that, but I was in the men's 8 in Rio. So it was the big boat, the 8-person boat that everyone thinks about when they think about rowing crew.
That's cool. How'd you guys do?
We were 4th, just outside the medals, man.
Oh man.
I know,
sucks.
right?
That sucks. Cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, obviously, to have that kind of success, I'm a big believer, and I'm a physical fitness type of guy. I've done some really big challenges, and part of the reason why I do that and have done that is because I always listen to these uber successful people that I can resonate with, and they all seem to be like super athletes, whether it's ultra athletes or triathletes or things like that. And there is a direct correlation, in my opinion, to success in that world over to success to business, no matter what you do. So I imagine one kind of helped propel you into the other. And so you got out of doing that, which I imagine was a full-time quote unquote job. What
Yeah.
happened next in your life?
Yeah. So for context, when I was training for the Olympics, I mean, it was obviously a culmination of a career, but really it was about 14 to 16 months out. I stopped working. I was training and working on the side. I was selling solar panels and basically doing commission only jobs because it was flexible and I could figure it out to support myself when I was training. And then like I said, about 14, 15 months out, I stopped and had to pull together funding from some family members. Thanks, Dad and uncles and stuff, and got a little bit of support from the governing body, not much, and basically committed myself for that amount of time to following the team around and training twice a day. And it was like eat, sleep, and breathe rowing. That was my year plus prior to the games.
Awesome.
So then, as you can imagine, that really, I won't say burn someone out, but it really taxes you in a way that is hard to describe. And so I realized quickly I needed to just take some time and reassess if I wanted to go back for another shot or not. And I always knew real estate was of interest to me. My family at various levels has been involved in owning apartment buildings or doing real estate law, which is my dad, and a variety of other examples throughout our history. So I always kind of thought I would be involved, but I never knew exactly what. And frankly, I didn't want to go to the city and commute to San Francisco, that is, and do commercial real estate and wear a coat and tie and all that stuff. Not that anyone wears ties in San Francisco, but I just didn't want to live that life. So I had an Airbnb host of all things from when I would go train down in San Diego, who was a real estate agent. He was flipping houses down there on the side. He had a pretty cool lifestyle. His wife was doing it with him. And I was like, what do you guys do? And he's like, well, why don't you come down and I'll talk to you about it. And long story short, he convinced me that was going to be a really good idea. And that was just 4.5 years ago, I think, or
Wow.
just over 4 years ago.
Wow. And so, and ever since, you have taken on obviously hockey stick or just rocket ship kind of success. We got to hear about it, man. I mean, so you got in 4 years ago. Where did you start? And then kind of what would you define? So, after answering the first question, then what would you define as one of the key pieces that is taking you to the levels that you're at now?
Yeah. So just over 4 years ago, I really started as more of an ISA for this team I was on. Just banging the phones, man. I was on Mojo triple line dialer, just calling through, foreclosures and expireds and anything and everything I could set an appointment for. And I wasn't licensed at the time. So anytime I'd get an appointment, my mentor would fly up from San Diego and go do the appointment.
Wow.
And I would shadow him. And that's kind of how I learned. And, my first year, I think I closed 9 transactions. Almost all of them were some form of foreclosures or short sales or some crazy thing like that. Because it was low hanging fruit. There wasn't a lot of competition in that space in our area. And frankly, it was a good place to cut my teeth. And, fast forward another year and a half, I got introduced through rowing and some other mutual connections to the top realtors in our geography, David and Andrew, who are now my team leaders. And I kind of met them and realized like, hey, they're doing something really special. Like no one in our geography had ever closed over 100 million in volume. And they had been doing it year over year since I think 2014 at that point. So they were the one team who had ever just cracked that and were just pounding past that, and we're going to do well over 200 and tapping on the door of 300 this year. And so I was like, man, these guys they've figured something out. I got to go learn from them. So I basically pitched them as to why I'd be a good addition on their team. They seemed to think that was a good pitch. And it took me for an interview, second interview, and made me an offer to come be an agent on their team and get in their slipstream.
I love that. And I want to comment on that because whenever I coach and mentor, I run, I don't even do that as much anymore because I have partners, but I run a very big mortgage team, 300 plus million, and we'll do over 1,700 transactions, and we're big and growing.
Yeah.
And I always tell younger loan officers that a lot of them come to work for us because of me and my influence, right? They're attracted to that. But at the end of the day, I always tell them, listen, you're not going to learn from one person, and you're not going to do exactly what I did, emulate it, and become the same thing. You need to go find different successful people doing it at just a better level than you or a different level than you. Take bits and pieces from different people, mold it into your own, and become your own dominant force, right? And what you just said to me is, I love that, because I don't know that enough realtors listening to this right now take that same approach, which is, I'm going to go find the best in the business and I'm going to learn from them. At worst, what's the worst that would have happened? You sat down for lunch, you bought them lunch, cost you some money, and you picked their brains. That's priceless.
Absolutely.
And
Plus,
you funneled it into becoming a part of their team.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, really, it's like, if I tell people this all the time, whenever anyone's getting into the industry, I say, get on a team, and get on a team that is doing something. Like, you don't want to just get on a team that's doing like 20 or 30 deals a year and is barely, the rainmaker's doing, 80% of it. Like, that's not going to get you anything, especially now with COVID. We can't do open houses. And that's one of the big benefits of a team, is you kind of get access to holding the, open houses and the internet leads and all that other stuff. But if you can get the education and just the understanding of what it is they're doing and how they operate and how they talk to clients and how they negotiate and all that other stuff, the split that you're paying them is, if you're in this for the long run, is invaluable and will be the best return you ever made in your real estate career as far as an investment in yourself goes.
Love that, man. Love that. Okay. So this is not rocket science here, folks. And that's kind of the point of this, right? But it's not just simply joining team, becoming uber successful. What's next? Like, what's the next? So you joined that team and now look what you're doing now. So kind of give us that timeline.
Yeah. So joined that team just over 2 years ago. And I, for context, that first year in the business, I think I closed just under $5 million in real estate in 9 deals or something. The second year, which was a little bit on their team, and then partially on the previous team, I was at 7 million or 7.3 million, as I recall. Then my first full calendar year on the team, I got to 19.3 million. And then this year, I'm probably, right now, what's either closed or in escrow is 27.3 million. And I think we're going to crack 30 personally this year, which was my goal for 2020.
That's awesome.
Thank you. And for context, like, the average agent in the Bay Area, I think the average agent in California does like 7 sides a year. And the average in the Bay Area is slightly less. I think it's 5.5 or something like that. So, doing 20, 25 sides, especially because the price points are a lot higher, is serious volume relative to the competition. So anyone listening from another market's probably like, dude, you did 20 deals, like, big deal. I can't even do 20. I do 20 deals in a month. But it's like a very different sales trajectory and timeline. And frankly, our market is interesting because the turnover is lower and the inventory availability is a lot lower. Everyone knows California has a housing shortage, but that's just partially because there's not as many houses here for the number of people. And so and people stay longer and yada, yada. We can get into that. But yeah, the number one thing that I did to kind of get to that level inside that team was be basically as much of a sponge as I could possibly be and apply everything I learned as soon as I learned it. And the best compliment I've gotten from one of my mentors, David, who's the team leader, is that he's never seen someone learn and apply things as quickly as I have. And I attribute that 100% to my ability, to my rowing, days when I was being coached and you were out in the boat and the coach is yelling at you in the megaphone and you're in the middle of a race and he's telling you to do something. You got to do it like immediately, like on that stroke. Otherwise your boat's going to lose and you're going to be out. And so that repetition of practicing how to be coachable and apply it immediately and know that maybe he sees something you don't see. And he's really trying to help you be better, as opposed to like getting your ego involved and saying, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before and this is working and whatever. That's really, when it all comes down to it, that's really what I did differently than probably anybody else. And the results speak for themselves.
I love it. So let's get into the psychology of that. And before I do that, I want to point out to those of you listening, because I'm one of them. I'm in the Midwest. I have a loan officer that'll do 200 to 250 transactions in Wisconsin. It's different. Like we're actually about ready to open an office in Ventura and Santa Barbara. So I've been now studying California, and I know California really well. The difference, folks, for those of you who are like me, who are like, real impressive, 25 transactions. There's so much more competition in California. Mm-hmm. We can't even compare. There's a reason why you can do 200 transactions as a very successful loan officer or realtor in the Midwest. There's less competition. It's not that we have more homes. We probably have less, actually.
True.
It's just it's the way states like California, I think New York is very similar, especially in the big city. Boston, probably the same, where there's just more competition because people migrate there because they think to themselves, ooh, all I have to do is close 5 deals and make a good living. So it creates more competition. So it's a different challenge. So I wanted to give that context because I understand it and I agree with you, because especially the Bay Area, which is just off the charts in terms of volume. It's a different beast.
Just for context, your comment brought this up for me. I don't transact in San Francisco proper. I'm on the Oakland side, so just across the bay. I think San Francisco is just under 19 square miles, the city itself. And that MLS board has over 8,000 active agents on it. Wow. So you think 8,000 agents for 18 square miles. Granted, there's density and what have you, but like that's competition, right?
Yeah, that's insane. All right, so let's get back to the psychology. And I think what you said to me, the first thing I thought was, you're an executor, right? You take something, you execute, you take something, you execute it. And that is one of the biggest epidemics, in a bad way, in any industry. Like when you go to an event, for example, you get really hyped up, you get really excited, then you go home, you get caught up in minutia, you do nothing. And I hear this all the time. And I guarantee 100% of the people listening to this can think to themselves, raise my hand. Mm-hmm. I'm guilty, right? So let's get into the psychology of that and help one of those listeners overcome that and become better at executing and taking action.
Let's keep it real for a second. Like I am not like the perfect model here of execute and follow through. Like I just have built systems around me so that I can have a better chance at actually doing it. And to be fair, I have practiced that sort of coachability and execution piece a lot in my teens and 20s through my rowing, and just did it at a high level for a number of years. So that part came a little bit easier to me maybe than the average person. But I think it really comes down to like I listen to podcasts and get totally overwhelmed all the time. I go to events, same thing. And really what I think is absolutely critical is just starting somewhere and just committing to like one thing. I'll give you an example. When I started my podcast just over a year ago now, I was thinking vlog, I was thinking podcast, blogging, social media, posting, you name it. I was thinking to do it. And I was trying it all, but I was really inconsistent. And it wasn't until I hired a coach for the podcasting that I really just said, I'm going to commit to this for one full year. I'm going to do 2 episodes a week. And I don't really care how many people are listening. I don't really like, that's not the point. The point is the exercise of execution and doing it. And at a certain point, if you put out 120 plus episodes, which I'm at now, people are going to find it and listen to it. And that practice like built that muscle for me, so that when, for example, when COVID hit, I then was ready to take on a YouTube channel and a newsletter that I push out every 2 weeks, and really just started to build the systems, build the repetition, build the calendar space around those activities so that I could actually commit to them. And then mentally also commit that I'm going to do this for at least a year. And by then it's a habit. So my advice is simply, you do not have to do it all at once. And probably if you spend realistically a month or two just trying something and posting consistently to Facebook, doing a Facebook Live once a week on Friday, doing an interview podcast or something once a week, and you just put that on your calendar and you just commit to that and do nothing else differently, you'll be pretty surprised at what you produce over a couple of months. You'll get some momentum, you get some traction, and then you might be ready to add whatever the next thing is, or step it up to 2 a week, or whatever the thing is. But just focus on the one thing and really dial in and commit to yourself. Because if you really commit to yourself, you're the one who knows if you do it or you don't do it. And that will start to feel good and lead you in all kinds of cool directions.
I love it, dude. And we, you don't know this, but you and I speak a very similar language, and I've just been doing it longer than you have. But the thing that I say to people all the time is become neurotically consistent and ignore vanity. And that's basically what you said, right? And
yeah,
I love that. And I would actually I wouldn't say argue with you, but I would say 2 to 3 months is not a good metric. It's not good enough. And the reason I say that is because, especially today, like when I started doing video, because that's my game, 5-6 years ago, I was one of the only ones in the space. And so it was very easy to get seen. Now it's massively diluted. So if you say, like Hans, I'm going to start a podcast, I'm going to start vlogging, I'm going to start doing a weekly live, whatever it is, it's more diluted now. And you need to, and I think Hans will agree with this, ignore the vanity metrics. It does not matter. Just keep doing it. You commit to yourself, have zero metric goals in mind other than consistency, and just stick to it. Is that basically what you were saying? I mean, does that sum it up?
Yeah. And the 2 to 3 month thing too. And I agree with you that you're right. You probably need more like 6 to 12 months it's like farming or any other activity would do. Like anybody tells you, as long as it's not you're buying leads online, it's got to be consistent over time. And I'm saying more in 2 to 3 months, you can be surprised at how consistent and how regular that becomes. It's just part of you, as opposed to it's going to take you forever to build that muscle.
That's true. Muscle memory basically is what you're talking
about. Exactly. 100% agree with you though. It's like getting consistent with yourself. And even if like 10 people are watching or listening, like how many of us as realtors would say, if I could get 45 minutes of 10 people's time once a week, I would take that and talk about whatever I wanted to talk about, and they would show up and be captive to my audience. Like you would walk into that room 10 out of 10 times, right? So that's what you're doing on a podcast or a 10 view YouTube video. Same exact thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And you're right. I guess again, I always go back to exercise. If you do it consistently over 90 days, usually it becomes habit. And I think that's what Hans means here. But don't expect an ROI quickly. 6 to 12 is probably even not long enough. Like that, if you are doing something consistently, stick it out for 2 to 3 years. That's when you'll know if it's going to work. And if you do it neurotically consistent, you will get the results. And I think, I will just say it, Hans, I think you are an exception to most rules. I mean, you've been doing this 4 years. I've been doing it 20, but it took me 15 to figure out like how to really differentiate, how to truly differentiate. And you've just figured it out a hell of a lot sooner. And let me also say this. I think a lot of people might be thinking to themselves, okay, so he was an Olympic rower. Yes, but he wasn't born an Olympic rower. He wasn't born with discipline. He just learned to teach himself that discipline at a very young age, which most of us don't get until we're like in our 40s. That's just that's the reality, right? And I think at the end of the day, we're listening to somebody here who figured out how to grow and build discipline at a very young age. And now he's applying it and achieving some massive results. So we talk a little bit about that psychology. We talk about, I really kind of being coachable, but also applying it, right?
Mhm.
There's got to be more to it than that, though. It's not just quite that simple. What are some of the other things that you've done that you would attribute a lot of your success to?
We have a couple of new agents on our team who are literally like the ink is still drying on their real estate license, and they're still, figuring it out. One's done one deal, one it's like he hasn't even gotten the actual license yet. It's so fresh. But um,
Wow.
the thing that I've told them, because they see me as 4 years in, selling, the 27 million that I've done this year or whatever, and they're excited about that because they see it's possible. And so they're like always asking me like, what do you do? What should I do? Blah, blah, blah. And the things that I really did was, in the beginning, I decided, am I really in this? Like, am I trying to be a real estate agent for the long term and really serve people over the long term? And if I am, then I certainly need to learn marketing and all that other stuff and getting clients, but I also need to learn how to be a really awesome agent. And to me and to my team leaders, that means being a true fiduciary, because that's what all of our licenses say, at least in California, is we have to put other people's interests in front of our own and represent them the best we possibly can. And so that means understanding at an unbelievably detailed level the contract that we write offers on and all the addendums and the counter offers and all that stuff. I've read the contract backwards and forwards. I can tell you exactly where everything goes by line item. I can tell you exactly the loophole in line paragraph 14b5, for example, and I can explain that to somebody as to why we either want to close that or exploit that as is appropriate. And so that level of detail, like really truly being a student of your craft and being able to articulate what that means to a client, I think is hugely valuable, because if not, you're kind of just pushing paper to a certain extent. So that, as well as market nuances. Our market geographically is very unique because we have water on one side, and about 5 miles inland or less, we have mountains, and we have a hill that separates it, and we have a bunch of freeways that separate that. And then it's very micro neighborhood-esque. And so I really made a point my first year and a half, well, basically until COVID took this away. I was going on tour every single week, going and seeing as many properties and the price points that I wanted to work in, and understanding those neighborhoods and those nuances, so I could, again, articulate that and be like, if you're on this side of the street, you are now in a different neighborhood, you have a different price per square foot, or you're going to start pulling comps that are bigger, so you need to make adjustments down, or blah, blah, blah. And really got tuned in and dialed in with my craft so that I could basically serve clients at a very, very high level. And then they would start referring me their friends and their colleagues and all those kinds of people. And so my advice to someone who is starting out or trying to figure out how to take themselves to the next level is, yes, figure out the branding piece, but the work you do for your client, I believe, is truly your best piece of branding you can possibly do. Because then they will be a walking billboard. If you just knock it out of the park and you cover their butts and you protect them and you get them the best possible deal, like, they are going to refer you if you really kill it for them.
I love that. So is that the advice that you're giving these young guys? Is that, it's not starting a podcast, it's not posting every single day, it's not vlogging, it's, hey, become an expert at your craft, because frankly, a lot of realtors aren't.
Yeah, that's I get torn on that, to be totally honest, because I 100% understand the need. You got to get some closings in the door when you get started. Otherwise, you're going to burn out. You're not going to have any money. 100%. I get that. You've got to get out in front of people, whether it's online or in person, and get some clients. So there, while honoring that, I think everyone needs to find a balance of like, how much time can I dedicate every day to like working my network or door knocking or doing mailers or whatever I need to do online, and learning the contract and learning the nuances of our market, and all the things that come with actually being a good agent. And because you could be the best agent, the best versed agent, but if you have no clients, it doesn't matter because you're not serving anyone. And you could have a bazillion clients, but if you're an idiot and you get people into bad deals, or you have them release contingencies before they're ready, and then they buy a house that has mold in it or something, you're screwed because they're going to be a walking billboard the opposite direction from you. So, anyways, that's just to say that I don't have a great answer for that, because I think both are absolutely necessary. But I think if you're really committing yourself to this as a long career, it pays dividends in the long run to build the foundation for success up front.
I love it. I love it. And you mentioned something that I wanted to ask you to go a little deeper on. You said you would go on tour. And so at first I thought you were going to say visiting open houses, visiting new listings, but it was understanding like the micro intricacies of a neighborhood or of a community. So when you said going on tour, what does that look like? What does that mean to you?
So that was, so depending on the zip code, we would have brokers tour on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday were the three. And so I don't know if every market does it like this, but in addition to open houses on the weekends, it's typical that you would hold a broker's tour from somewhere between 10 and 1 p.m. For all the real estate agents to come in, ooh and ah at the listing and catch up on the gossip and stuff. So I would make it a point to basically block my schedule to commit to going on tour, so that I could understand the marketplace that I was operating in. And that, like, I knew my city and I knew the cities around it enough. Like I knew where some restaurants were and all that kind of stuff. But when you start actually driving these neighborhoods, getting out, walking into the front door of the house, talking to the agent about the area, maybe catching a neighbor and saying hi and asking them their opinion, you really build a base of knowledge of the marketplace you're operating in. And that was a deep commitment that I had for the first year and a half. I was on the Gunderman group, and I was doing it up until COVID said we couldn't do it anymore. And it really wasn't just going and like walking through a house and thinking it's pretty. It was like really trying to digest, like, how much are they listing this house for? How many beds and baths does it have? What is the flow? Is it 2 beds up and 1 bed down? Does it have an unfinished basement, or is it a finished basement? Is it a single level versus multi-level? What are the nuances that are affecting the value and desirability? And then I would try and keep track of, like, once they took offers, how many did they get? How much over the ask did it go? Where did it eventually close at? Like, so if I walk into a house, I'm like, this is a 1.3 to 1.35 house. And now I have a good base of that I can tell my clients. I'm like, I think this will probably go to blah. And if, it could go a little less if there's no competition, but I think that's where you need to be. And, that has, and then I go back it up with stats and all that other stuff, but it gives you just such a confidence when you walk in with the client to be able to really serve them at a high level and actually provide value. Because ultimately, if we just push paper, like, we're going to get outsourced to technology at some point. So I just felt like that was absolutely critically important for me.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, so I want to kind of circle back on something that I touched on, but I didn't bring to light much, and I don't think it's talked about enough in our industries, or any industry for that matter. And one is, you mentioned, how you joined the best team in your market. But what the audience doesn't know is that how you became to be a podcast guest, right? You simply asked. That's it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Like, this is a pretty big podcast, biggest real estate group, but it's not saying we accept everyone, but if you have a good, compelling story, all you have to do is ask, because we're always interested in bringing different value. And that's not the reason why I'm bringing it up. I'm bringing it up because, again, going back to what I said before, which is, surrounding yourself with the best of the best, not being afraid to ask. And clearly you have that trait. Like, a lot of people would just simply be intimidated to email Tristan Ahumada and to just ask, hey, can I be on the podcast? And here's why. It's not just simply, can I be on the podcast? You have to have a compelling story. And obviously you had that. You had me at Olympian, just so you know, which
That
helps
usually gets most people.
it
Yeah,
helps.
it
It
helps.
helps. But
It's a good title. Yeah.
but it's not just this, right? So clearly, if you did it with us, you did it with your team leads. You probably did it with your original mentor to a certain degree. If you could, and you weren't expecting this question, but so everybody's got a different story. Not everybody was an Olympian. Not everybody lives in the Bay Area. But for those that are young to the business and just are struggling to find their way, coming from the horse's mouth, someone who's young in the industry, someone who's executed on this strategy, what would be advice you would give someone who said, man, yeah, I feel like I do need to talk to some successful people, but I'm intimidated or I don't know how to reach out to them. What's the kind of advice you would give somebody there? Because I do believe that is a critical step in taking your business to other levels.
Yeah. Well, I have to say I was, I mentioned the podcast host or coach earlier, which was Travis Chappell, who has the Build Your Network podcast. And I hired him to teach me how to podcast properly up front, but I didn't hire him just for that. I hired him for mentality, which was his whole spiel around podcasting was create a podcast, which is a platform, just like a Facebook Live or a YouTube channel is a platform, and use that to leverage to get in front of the people that you want to spend 45 minutes with. And if no one listens, but you have 100 conversations a year with people you respect and ask them the questions you want to ask them, then bingo, your network is bigger, you're smarter. And so my answer is like, create an excuse that is valuable to that person to go have a conversation with them. In a podcast or a Facebook Live or anything like that is A, free, and B, the best excuse ever, because we're all busy. If someone asks me to go to lunch, so if you're in the Bay Area and you want to grab a beer, hit me up, but I'm always down for that. But you go ask someone to lunch, like they get hit up all the time, especially if they're successful, to pick their brain or whatever. But if someone hits me up and is like, hey, will you come on my podcast? 100% yes, because I have one, but B, that's going to be a conversation that gets out in front of 100 more people that I didn't know, and now I have more exposure. So you're providing them value as well as you're getting some from them. But ultimately, you're right. You simply have to ask and craft the message and say, why would this person want to sit with me? And put yourself in their shoes, and then give them something compelling to chew on. It doesn't have to be a long email. I think the email I sent you was a paragraph and a half, maybe, if that, and most of it was bullet points, I think. So, simply asking, but then thinking a little more strategically on like, how can I provide some value to this person in the process of trying to get what I want?
You hit the nail on the head. And I am surrounded by some whales in the industry, like billionaire whales. And I can tell you, I've heard them, they've become friends, and they have told me or told audiences, like they hear it. There's masterminds, there's events, and you want to quote unquote pick their brain. If they had a nickel for every time somebody came up to them and said, I want to pick your brain, they'd be a multi-billionaire, right?
Right.
And so what Hans just said is so important. Find a way to bring value. That's where it flips the tables and gets them to pay attention. Because remember, if you go up to them and say the exact same thing, this applies to so many different conversations, but if you go up to them and say the exact same thing that everybody's saying, hey, do you have a minute? I'd love to pick your brain. What? No, they don't have a minute. Like they're super busy. However, and I'm going to totally go against myself here, successful people, they're totally willing to share. You'd be shocked. Like they're willing to share, but you got to figure out how to get to them. So was there any certain technique you used with the team that you joined?
Yeah. I happen to have some inside information because one of my wife's clients, she's a personal trainer and has her own pretty awesome business around personal training. One of her clients was the sales manager for the office that David and Andrew, my team leaders, were a part of, and was a colleague of theirs, a fellow realtor for years and years. So good friend. And we had dinner with her and her husband, the four of us, and she basically turned that into a job interview. But I came out of there knowing two things. One, they just let go of someone who they were kind of thinking might sort of help take over their team at some point. And two, they're always looking for good talent. And so I was like, okay, I need to craft a message to them and reach out to them and say, I've got talent and I'm someone who can help apply what the energies and the skills that I have um, to give you guys some more time with your family, because their kids were about to go off to college and are now in college, so that you can hand some more responsibilities over. I can help. I can go hustle at open houses. I can, I named like 3 or 4 different things that I could do that I didn't think they were doing right at that moment. And I took me like a week to craft this email, but because I was like strategizing over every word, but ultimately it was just about like, how could I help them? And I felt like I had something to offer to bring to the team. And it wasn't just like, hey, if you bring me on your team, I'll work some of your leads for you and then you can take a split. Like, okay, you and everybody else. But like, I really hit on their family, giving them more time back, giving them, the opportunity, I don't remember exactly what the email was, but it was all about that and about them most specifically. And it resonated.
Well, it was probably unique. I mean, let me summarize what he just said, which is brilliant. Because the first thing that I think comes to a lot of salespeople's minds is, hey, let me join your team and I'll make you more money. Listen, successful people don't give a crap. They've already got plenty of money. They know how to make money. They don't need you to make them more money. And what
Yeah.
Hans did is so brilliant. And there's two pieces to it, not the value piece, but guess how he figured out how to bring value? He did his homework. He did his homework. He knew they had families. He knew at what stage in life the family was in. Dude, that's so smart. It's so brilliant. And just real quick, I want to share a quick story because I don't share this very often because I'm always the interviewer, but because it's so relevant. A lot of people ask me, A, you're a mortgage guy. The only reason you get invited into real estate rooms is for 3 reasons. One is to bring donuts. The other one is to buy drinks. And the other one is to give my credit card. That's it. That's the only reason why we're invited into rooms. Here I am, the guy hosting the Lab Coat Agents podcast, speaking to realtors across the country, teaching branding strategies and video and all this stuff. I'm being called. Yeah, I flipped the table, right? And so how did you get involved with Lab Coat Agents? And the short answer, it's a long story. I won't give it to you today, but the short answer is I figured out how to bring value to Tristan. We became friends, we became partners, but I figured out how to bring him value. And then I just worked on it and I executed it. And he was so impressed. It's like, I can't live without you kind of mentality. It's exactly how your team leads probably felt about you. Like, damn, this guy's impressive. And
Yeah.
it's, I love it, dude. I love it.
Well, and then to piggyback on what you just said, you probably were also not looking for an immediate ROI when you were bringing that value up front. And you were really trying to build relationships with no agenda. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with the ask is that it always is attached. There's always an attachment. There's always something like, yeah, I'm going to scratch your back today, but I expect something tomorrow kind of thing. And people sniff that out in 10 seconds. Like, let's be real. And if you really genuinely, again, long-term mentality, come to this with the idea that you're going to be in this for the long run, you want to build value for the long run, like you said, 2-3 years to build a channel or whatever, you've got to bring that mentality to every interaction that you do. And same thing with your clients. And if you do that genuinely, you might miss a few sales, or you might have a slower start, but I can guarantee you it will hockey stick very quickly if you really truly bring that mentality to every engagement you find yourself in.
I love it, man. Moral of the story is, folks, you cannot stress bringing value. And whether it's somebody you want to learn from, whether it's just your community, that's the key, right? And you know this better than anyone. Like, you want to become the community mayor, bring value to the community. That's the key. And I'm not talking about real estate statistics. Anybody can do that. Bring real value that they actually want to consume, even though they're not even thinking about selling or buying, right? That's the key. Hans, it's been awesome, man. It's been a fun conversation. Do you have any parting thoughts or anything that you want to leave with our audience?
Yeah, the last thing I would say is I think a lot of agents in general they try and hold on to their secret sauce or I don't know, like their secret, right? In my opinion, whenever I was in an open house or whenever I'm on a video or on a podcast or just a Zoom meeting with a new client one-on-one, I'm trying to give it away. I'm trying to give away the knowledge that I have. I'm trying to help them understand the nuances that they're getting into. And I really don't hold back when it comes to giving value to them. And frankly, like, hopefully most of my clients have like a minor, if not a PhD in real estate sales by the time they're done, because I've explained everything to them. I've helped them understand it to the level that they care to understand it. And, I think you need to be really willing to just give away the knowledge that you have, because that will attract people. Our team has a philosophy of like a lean in, lean out. If you're in a conversation, you can when someone's leaning into your space a little too hard. And if it's a sales environment, that really turns most people off, especially when you're standing in $1 million house. And so when you lean back and you talk to them about the market nuance and the contract and how this disclosure item is nuanced in this other way, and that they should be aware of it, and make sure you go call your insurance broker because the creek in the back might be a flood zone and blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, can we get your card? It's like that lean out, lean in thing, right? So figure out how to apply that in every one of your interactions, and I guarantee it'll pay off.
I love it, man. So anybody who's sat here at the beginning of this podcast and thought to themselves, what am I going to learn from a young chap who's only been in the business for 4 years? This is, it took me 15 years and I was successful before them, but it took me a long time to figure this kind of stuff out. And, Hans, clearly you used your Olympic, traits, the things that got you to the Olympics, and you've applied them. And I love it, man. This has been very, very valuable. And, I'm glad you reached out to us, folks. Remember, just don't be afraid to reach out to the people in your community. One last question for you on that. It is common that successful people will brush aside or ignore. Do you have any advice for that? Because somebody might be thinking to themselves, well, I've tried that, and then they don't reply. Do you have any advice for somebody in that position?
What I would ask is, number one, how many times have you tried? And then number two, have you tried a different approach? Number one, like if you send one email out, like I reached out to a handful of podcasts and you were nice enough to respond to my first one, but I have a reminder next week to go reach out to all the other ones. And I'm going to go through Instagram next time, or I'm going to go through this channel next time, And so figuring out different approaches, because everyone's different, and you got to change your messaging up, change your approach up in a different way. Send them a video instead of a text or whatever. That to me is absolutely how you need to approach it. And then ultimately, you're not going to get everybody. Like I'm not going to get on every single podcast I ever reach out to, and that's okay. Like maybe not the fit for every single show. And maybe it's a year from now that they want to have me on. I don't know. But the point is, take the action, follow up, provide value, and then, ultimately the law of numbers will work in your favor on that one.
That's golden advice, folks. Those are powerful nuggets right there. So hopefully many of you took a lot from this today. Hans, it has been fantastic to get to know you. Is there, if anybody wants to reach out to you, if they want to get to know you, what's the best way to find you?
If you're on social, I'm pretty active over on Instagram. My handle is @ChiefSna. That's SNAH. That's Hans backwards. I've got a good story about that if anyone wants to hit me up in the DMs, and it's a good one. And then my website, of course, which has got my real estate stuff, is podcast stuff, is hansstruzyna.com. That's STRUZYNA.
Awesome. Chief Sna. I love it. Hans backwards. That's awesome, on Instagram. Well, Hans, it has been a pleasure. I hope we stay in touch and we run into each other when the world comes back to normal at an event sometime when I'm out in California, my friend.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, man, appreciate you having me on. Great podcast. Really appreciate the value you guys bring every week, and really honored to have been part of it.
Lab Coat Agents Podcast.